Hey everybody, welcome back to Jeff Bull Central. Oh boy, where to start with this one? So this is an old game. This is about a 30-year-old video game, which might as well be ancient history for most people on YouTube, because we're all so young usually. This is Rebel Assault 2, Star Wars Rebel Assault 2. This originally came out on CD-ROM for PC. And that's where I first played it. I played it in maybe 1996 or so. My parents bought our first modern computer, okay? And by a modern computer, I mean it didn't do DOS. It ran Windows 95, because you had to have that to play this. And this is literally my first computer game ever. Ever. I was maybe I guess 11 years old, maybe 12 years old. And it was Star Wars. I mean, for crying out loud, it's a live action Star Wars game. You couldn't get that on Sega Genesis. You know what I mean? So it was kind of special for me. I spent a lot of time playing this game. It's literally a 2 or 3 hour game if you play it from start to finish. I pounded through it this morning. This is on PlayStation 5. This just came out on the PS5 as a throwback title, native for PS5, although you wouldn't know it to look at it, but what are they going to do? It's a 30-year-old game. And this came out in an era before the prequels, believe it or not. For those of you young enough not to have existed before the prequels existed, there was a time when Star Wars meant 3 movies, and you called it the Star Wars trilogy, not the Skywalker saga, not the Star Wars saga. You called it the Star Wars trilogy. And people my age and people a little bit older, people who grew up on those movies, we were obsessed with Star Wars. I still am obsessed with Star Wars, let's be honest. Because I just did a Star Wars game the other day, and here I am doing it again. But look, this was like a sequel to Star Wars before there were prequels to Star Wars. This was like getting the next live-action glimpse of the galaxy far, far away before Anakin and Obi-Wan even stepped on the screen, before Rey ever stepped on the screen, Rey Skywalker, before Luke came back, before Han came back and then was killed by his son, Ben. Do you hear what I'm saying? Sorry. I'm a little zealous with this one. So it's a special game for me. I mean, like I said, it's cheesy, but it was pretty cool at the time because it was live action, right? And it mixed actual CG pre-rendered cutscenes of the type that they would later use. This is even before the special editions of the original trilogy came out. All we had was VHS. We had the movies on tape. That was the only way to watch them back then. Now, we've established what the game was. Let's establish what the game is. Because the first thing you want to know, if I'm playing this on PS5, and by the way, it's in the ultimate version of the PS Plus thing. So it's like $18 a month, gets you the ultimate version, and this is in there. Or it's $5 if you just want to buy it from PlayStation, which I think is totally worth it, even though it's a 2 or 3 hour game, like I said. Here's the thing with this. It's kind of not a good game. That was a long way to go. We're almost 4 minutes into the video, and I'm here to tell you it's not a good game. Kind of not even by standards back then, because it's frustrating to play. It was frustrating for me today on a DualSense PS5 controller. I don't remember exactly because I was so enamored with what I thought it could be because we didn't have more movies at that time. It was probably frustrating for me with a mouse and keyboard back then, too. It's a game that, if it's not doing a live-action cutscene, the gameplay is on rails, which is an old thing that games used to do. I'm trying to think. What's a kind of a modern, like the Panzer Dragoon series, if you're familiar with that, on rails, okay? Meaning you go in one direction, you have limited control, pitch, and yaw. Roll is not an option. And turning around in space is not an option. It's not three-dimensional, not really. You get to go forward, you get to go a little up, a little down, a little left, a little right, and maybe you get a laser, a blaster capability to shoot stuff, right? There is also on-the-ground segments, although there's fewer of those, where you have cover and you can get out of cover and you can shoot, and your cursor is murder to try to place on an actual stormtrooper. It's harder than hell to hit a stormtrooper. This is a game where the stormtroopers shoot better than you do, okay, than the Rebel Alliance, which is just, impossible for Star Wars, right? And like the speeder bike chase. Can I tell you how many times I had to do this speeder bike chase this morning? Because the boundaries are not as well established as the graphics would suggest. You have to kind of stay in the middle of the screen, and they invert the controls. Now, luckily on the PlayStation 5, there's saving, which there didn't used to be. You had to enter in a code to get you back to where you were. There is also changing the controls around and making up, down, and down, up, if that's what you're more comfortable with, like I am. I don't really do inverted controls so well. My brain doesn't process it for some reason. But the borders of the screen on these sequences where you're a TIE fighter or an X-Wing or a speeder bike, those borders are death. And you don't even see things there. It looks like open space. So it's like, well, not exactly like open space, but sometimes it's like open space. So it's kind of a frustrating experience. It's kind of hard to get through. I did get through it in a few hours this morning. And it was a trip down. It was a trip down memory lane. It was a bit of nostalgia, more than a bit of nostalgia. I didn't even know that you could play this game on a console. I do know that it was released on PS1, but imagine playing it on the PlayStation 5 in the year 2024, almost 30 years later. It's kind of a treat, even if it sucks. And it's made by LucasArts, because that's the only company at the time who were making Star Wars games. LucasArts lasted from, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say the late 80s, early 90s, all the way up through the 2010s when Disney bought Lucasfilm, and they destroyed, or rather cut loose, or rather disbanded what was left of LucasArts. LucasArts at that time had kind of fallen into a slump, so there wasn't really much there to appreciate. And now, of course, the Star Wars license is farmed out to, for instance, EA. Ubisoft is making Star Wars, Star Wars Outlaws? Is that what it's called? This really awesome looking game that's coming out here in September, late August. This is LucasArts, though, and they had the only license to Star Wars, and they had full access to the Lucasfilm library of props, for instance, because a lot of this is live-action film, and sound effects, special effects, film, all the outtakes. In other words, they could construct a very authentic experience, and they sure did. And in fact, George Lucas himself is credited in the beginning credits, so I know he had a hand in something like this. It was a special product in 1995, a big deal. And the graphics are just superior in every way to anything you could find on console. It just was not even close. So in reality, what you have here is a game that was worthwhile then. It's worthwhile to try now, especially if you played it or you are a Star Wars fanatic. In the long run, though, you'll probably never touch it again. That's Star Wars Rebel Assault 2! Woohoo!
School when I was 9, told me she had feelings, she had lies.